Welcome to Herd Around the Barn, where we talk about farmed animals, about food, and about changing the world one bite at a time. I'm your host, Kathy Stevens, founder of New York's Catskill Animal Sanctuary, where hundreds of animals experience what love feels like every single day. Each Wednesday, we chat with a leader in animal rights or in plant-based health and nutrition, or an everyday hero doing their part to make the world a more compassionate place for all of us. Thanks for tuning in. And now let's get moving. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. This Sunday is Easter Sunday, a time when the faithful celebrate the rebirth of Christ, and a time when all of us, religious or not, celebrate a different kind of rebirth in the coming of spring. The irony and hypocrisy of our Easter celebrations have made me uneasy for a very long time. This isn't the first, and it probably won't be the last time that I call attention to the irony of celebrating the rebirth of Jesus Christ by killing millions of baby animals worldwide and over 2 million in the U.S. alone. Just because the tradition of roasted lamb goes back thousands of years doesn't make it ethically justifiable. How can it be okay to kill and consume millions of babies to honor Christ's rebirth? But it's what we do around the world every Easter. Our very own little Nina, a beautiful young sheep and a member of our free-ranging Underfoot gang, was almost one of those lambs killed violently to celebrate Easter. Today, we're talking with a man who loves lambs, so much so that he has transformed his life in order to protect them. His name is Brendon Smale, and he's the founder of St. Bean's Animal Sanctuary for Lambs in New Zealand. Today, he'll tell us about his grand idea for helping people connect the dots of animal agriculture, how he approaches meat-based holidays with his family, and how one little lamb changed his life just a few years ago. Stay tuned, and may you enjoy this Easter Sunday without animals on your table. So again, I have such a connection with lambs. This is such a lovely opportunity. Thank you, Brendon, for joining us today.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me on.
You haven't always been a human dad to lambs. And in fact, you've worked for some of the largest companies in the world as a web designer, a film director, creative director, etc. Starbucks, Nike, Apple. And you also lived in Japan for almost a decade. What was your pre-Beans life like?
My pre-Beans life could not have been more different than it is today. I mean, I was living in one of the biggest cities environments, very busy, working on different projects. The absolute polar opposite of my life now. So and that kind of happened through, I guess, happy coincidences rather than a plan, so to speak.
And would you have said that you were happy in that life?
I mean, I did enjoy it. It was completely different. Japan in itself, especially Tokyo, everywhere in Japan, but Tokyo itself in the city is absolutely fascinating, and it's great to live in a completely different culture. The culture is so different that it gives you a wider perspective on kind of overall culture, which was fantastic. So I mean, no, I had an absolutely fantastic time in Tokyo. I did enjoy working the city life, but it's different now. So it's just a different wavelength now.
Well, it's so interesting because a lot of people are miserable in their corporate jobs, but you were not one of them. And so this must have been, or clearly was such a dramatic switch. Prior to this massive life change, how did animals figure in your life?
I did grow up in what they call here in New Zealand like a lifestyle block, where like when you just have a little bit of land, but it's you're basically kind of in the city. You're just on the city boundary, so you kind of got the best of both worlds. Because my family were all into horse riding, so there were a few sheep in the property. So I had a pet lamb when I was young.
So did I.
Which I loved. But one day I came back and there was a sheepskin in my room. And my mother thought it was a great idea to turn my pet lamb into a sheepskin, which
What?
to this day, I never. I mean, this is This is a few years after when he was older, and I had gotten a bit older myself, and wasn't kind of so involved. But I was still very shocked and not at all happy about it. So I did experience, animals growing up, and I think that helped shape my, overall opinion later on.
And one of the things you say now, in fact, I saw it on the St. Beans Animal Sanctuary Instagram page. You say not just dogs, lambs. That made me giggle, and I think I knew what you meant, but tell us about that. Is that sort of your motto?
So what I'm really trying to get across in my advocacy is I don't really see any distinction between, say, a lamb and a puppy, or a dog and a sheep. I mean, they're both mammals. They both have all the same senses. They both have the same size brain. The difference is cultural in our minds, not empirically in a scientific way. So what I'm trying to get across is, how about these other animals that are every bit as intelligent? And, obviously I'm so fond of beans and sheep that, I'm trying to get people to think about lambs as they would a puppy. And then that would immediately kind of pulls in a very different moral perspective of like, well, wait a minute, if they are kind of the same, outside of a human cultural judgment, then that has kind of big consequences for the way we would treat them.
Yeah, and for one's daily choices, right? If they are dogs, then what am I doing?
For me, they're equivalent. So there's this huge gap, cultural gap, that I'm trying to kind of just push the lambs up.
Yes, enormous cultural gap, particularly in your part of the world. And we feel exactly the same way, of course, about chickens and cows, because no matter what animal we eat, we always eat them as either babies or youngsters. So I'm glad you're sort of filling this gap in the animal rights space. Let's talk about how you found Beans. You call it a life-changing moment. What happened that morning that had you now upending your life to start a sanctuary for lambs in New Zealand?
Yeah, well, it was so coincidental that it's almost like, you get that kind of eerie feeling like it was almost supposed to be or something, because it was a beautiful day just like it is today, beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. So I decided to just go for a quick walk in the morning. And then on the just walking back, I just kind of caught in the corner of my eye something white in this kind of fenced off area. And I was kind of like, that. It was enough to say, that's a bit weird. What is that? And then as soon as I started walking towards it, it noticed me and kind of jumped up and responded. And I suddenly was, oh my goodness, it's a lamb. And so I went over and he came bounding towards me, like, just so happy that, barring his little head off and very happy to be discovered, because clearly what had happened is he was newborn, and probably had been rejected by his mother, which does, it happens occasionally, but it's very rare, but it does, occasionally happen when the mother just thinks she can't take on two, or she might think there's some kind of serious issue or something.
Yes.
That had obviously had happened to Beans, and he'd been pushed somehow into this kind of, like, through a fence. It was quite hard to get in there. And then he was very stuck in this and isolated, and there's no way out for him. And it was just fortunate that it was good weather, because I think it would have been bad weather that night, because he'd been on his own for probably 24 hours. He hadn't had a drink. I don't think he would have survived. But luckily he was fine. And the moment he saw me, he was just like, no, that's it. I don't care what you are. You are my hero. You're my
Dad.
Dad. He just immediately imprinted on me, and was super excited to be found. I picked him up, got him, and he just stuck to me like absolute glue, and just wouldn't stop barring and wouldn't let me out of his sight. I actually figured out kind of probably what had happened, and because there were some sheep that had been moved on, and I actually managed to figure out who his mother was. And at that time, I wasn't in the mindset of taking on a lamb, so I actually got the mother, and I put them in a yard with Beans in there. And Beans didn't want anything to do with him. They didn't want anything to do with Beans. Beans kept on getting himself out of the yard and then looking for me. So at that point, I just realised that, that wasn't going to work. And I raced down to the vet and got some the colostrum, which is the milk that they need at the very beginning. And I started bottle feeding him, and then from then on out, we're best friends.
Okay, you started bottle feeding him while you were in this very corporate life, right? It sounds like.
Yeah, I was freelancing, so yeah, I was still very very much in that mindset.
All right. So you took in this one lamb, you became his human dad. I had the privilege of having a little lamb when I was a kid. I also grew up around horses on a big thoroughbred farm and had a little lamb who wore diapers and lived in the house and followed me around as if I were her mom. And we have a sheep here now, Ferguson, who strongly prefers the company of humans to the company of sheep. And we've had, I mean, the most remarkable animal I've ever known, Brendon, was a sheep that we named Rambo. And my first book, Where the Blind Horse Sings, tells his story. He changed my life. And so I get it that sheep, well, all animals, but the sheep are the ones you know the very best, it sounds like. And
Yeah.
they are so much more than people know. Let's talk about some of them. You call yourself the human dad to Beans, Fanta, Frosty, Homer, Flora, Lily Lamb, Daisy Lamb. Are there any more now? Did I name them all?
No, there's one more thing, Bell.
And Belle.
That's my crew at the moment.
Where did they come from? You live in a country that has 5 times more sheep than people. Where did they come from?
They came from, yeah, kind of like a farmer, kind of like bit by bit, and kind of in like, not planned. Frosty's mother was like actually a pet that had then come to a farm, and unfortunately she died. And then Frosty was on his own, and so I got Frosty. Actually, some followers on Instagram, I took a photo of a farmer's lamb, and the followers on Instagram said, "Oh my goodness, you have to save, you have to save that lamb." They kind of made me do a fundraiser, and that was Bell, Homer, and Buttons, which I brought, and Fanta was another rescue. So yeah, it was kind of just they were all kind of like happy, coincidences.
Right, right. And at what point did you consciously say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'm going to start an animal sanctuary and have these, as you call them, and have these lambassadors. Love that. How far in did you say that consciously to yourself?
I think I started thinking about it maybe about 2 years ago, and then kind of like a year and a half, I started thinking about it like really, like that's really what I'm going to do. And then about a year ago, I started really kind of actually putting in a proper plan, saying, yeah, come up with a name, St. Beans. Because one of the strange things about Beans is he's a Wiltshire, so that means they have their natural shedding when most sheep have been bred for wool. And I think it's what a lot of people don't realise. They think when a sheep is getting shorn, is well, that's a good thing because they need to be shorn, but they're only like that because we have basically genetically modified them slowly through breeding over years and years and years to grow all this excess wool that they don't need,
Yes.
and
Yes.
not to shed it. But Beans is still a breed who actually have that natural shedding behaviour. So they grow a thick coat in winter and then they shed it all in summer and have a very thin coat. So the really just, again, remarkable thing about Beans is when he sheds, he forms these 2 perfect wings on the top of his back that are just absolutely perfect angel wings, I call them. So I call them wool angel wings. And it's quite something to see these 2 perfect little wings.
It must be.
So that's where the name kind of like mixing kind of that angelic kind of look with Beans' name is where the name came from, St. Beans. So that's when I started to do it properly. I set up the sanctuary name, etc. I started, building a website, taking it more seriously about a year ago.
So you're in the process of becoming a nonprofit and you have a very clear long-term vision. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so long term, I really want to do something, like similar along the lines of what you have there at Catskill, and the farm sanctuary. I really want to do that in New Zealand and kind of be the first to do that really well with a people focus in terms of helping people to connect the dots and getting people to come out. So I really want to be able to establish something that is very much for visitors and to use my kind of creative communication skills as well to be able to kind of communicate why we should do this, etc., and advocate for the animals. So the whole thing kind of become a platform for advocacy.
And will you stay with lambs or will you expand to include other farmed animals?
To start with, I'm really going to focus on lambs because I know them so well, and I could have thousands of acres, and there's so many lambs die each year in New Zealand from exposure because they breed them in winter. That if I was running out in paddocks and just saving all I could, and then had a whole bunch of volunteers doing that around the country, I mean, we could just have so many animals that would fill up. So there's going to be an endless supply of animals to rescue.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so at this point, it's going to very much be focused on lambs and then saving lambs, and then giving them a long, healthy life, but obviously, if I pull off the longer term plan, when I've got a large enough property, I mean, I think it's inevitable that obviously I'll expand out to other animals. But I think for at least say the stage one, it will most definitely I'll stay focused on
start with what you know, right? And this little one who spoke to you, and as you say somewhere, it is a gap in this movement. I don't know any sanctuaries whose focus is on lambs and sheep. And I also don't think that humans understand that lambs are consumed for meat to the extent that they are. And I also think that virtually everyone alive thinks that wool is fine, right? Can you talk about the industries? Here you are, you've made this emotional connection with this beautiful little being. He's been a teacher for you, right? In the way that the animals have here for us. You've seen how dog-like, how emotional, how individual they all are. Help people who have never understood that there's anything wrong with wool because sheep have to be shorn. Help us understand what the wool industry is like.
Sure. So I think what people don't think about is it's very different, and the animals really. If you're an animal in the dairy industry, if you're an animal in the wool industry, or if you're an animal in the meat industry, all of those animals get cycled at some point through a slaughterhouse, or they're going to get killed on the property. And I'm going to get retired to a sanctuary. I mean, this is one of the things I want to push. If I can get, pull off the master plan and get enough land, etc., is what doesn't the industry help fund somebody like me to have a retirement plan for these animals? If you really want to talk about being ethical, because as soon as the second that the wool on a sheep drops in quality, then it's not profitable for the farmer. So that animal is then immediately sent to slaughter. The only difference between a meat animal and a wool animal is they get to live longer, but they're still retired very young in terms of they could live twice, even longer.
Yes.
Twice their age.
And couldn't you argue that they get to live longer, which also means that they get to suffer longer because their lives aren't pieces of cake, are they?
Yeah, and there's all sorts of things that are, in the interest of profit. So they're interested in only having the very best, like, genetic stock that suits the market. Nothing to do with the animal itself. It suits the market preferences for the type of meat or the type of wool that they want. So there's constant breeding going on for them to perfect that thing. And like on the surface, you've got a wool industry that, here's all these happy animals, but dig into the details and say for every well looked after happy animal, how many has been culled for that? There'll be, a lot. One of the worst things with lambs is they breed them in winter. And New Zealand can have some pretty wild weather can come through, shooting up from Antarctica.
You have crazy winds?
Yeah, we can get some strong winds. We do get, pretty nasty little storms that can come through. And if that's happening in lambing, like thousands of lambs will die. And, I've rescued animals and tried to, like, lambs in that kind of hypothermic state. And they're just, it's horrible. They're really, really suffering. They're just like slowly shutting down. And that whole process of slowly shutting down is just extremely suffering.
In one of these storms that you describe in New Zealand, over 100,000 lambs died. Tell us about that and about how you responded when you heard farmers talking about the loss of their crop.
Yeah, well, I think it was like the media, the media covered it, which is, I guess, a good thing in itself, to do a proper story in it. But it was the entire thing was just all about the poor farmer. There wasn't even a slither of a mention of, okay, 100,000 animals, every bit as intelligent as your pet dog there, died a horrible, slow, painful death over the last 24 hours. 24 hours. There wasn't even a word of animal welfare in there at all.
Right.
There wasn't even like any question from the media like, shouldn't these lambs be maybe a little bit more protected? Like in the UK, they lamb indoors, or shouldn't we have built a few more kind of structures for them to shelter in, et cetera, et cetera. There was just absolutely just nothing at all in the reporting on it like that. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, that is just such a horrible moral kind of, just the sheer amount of suffering that must have gone on. Of
Yes.
100,000 lambs dying.
Yes.
It's just kind of like, almost like feel the pain kind of shooting through me, and the fact that it's just not even recognized. And it was all like the poor farmers, but to me, if the farmer was sufficiently motivated by either legal means, or maybe if they were worth more to them or something, I think they could have dramatically had that number down by just providing adequate shelter. That might cost a little bit of money, but I mean, I think even long term, these things happen every now and then. Why on earth not give them the shelter they need? It is difficult. I'm not saying that's easy, because some of the properties, especially down the south where it's more rugged, but I think it's the kind of thing that, of course, the human mind could come up with solutions if it was sufficiently motivated.
The human mind came up with factory farming. We can certainly build an outdoor shelter for some cold sheep. Good Lord. It reminds me of the reaction my friends and I have when there's some climate disaster here. And of late, there have been so many, as you know, so many enormous wildfires. And the talk is always about the loss of human housing. In the horrible Australia fires, I did read about the loss of animal life. But in the US, I have never once heard mention of the loss of animal life in these massive human-induced weather events. Let's shift gears for a minute. This episode is going to air right around Easter time. And like so many people, for years growing up as a kid, I ate a leg of lamb. It's a tradition that dates back thousands of years. And the sacrificial lamb metaphor takes on a literal meaning at Easter. In fact, we have a sheep little Nina, named after my best friend, who was rescued from a meat market at Easter, from a live market, those horrible live markets. We have about 75 of them in the New York area. So how do you navigate that conversation around Easter time? Just curious. We all have our own approaches.
From my experience, trying to kind of bring it up during those periods, I just don't know if it works. And in some respects, I think it almost has the opposite effect. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to try and put you in the crazy basket or something. and they're just not going to listen. And there's something going on in the mind where they're just not connecting. Like I can sit there and really go on about it and say, you can even get into lamb slaughter, for example. So that lamb that people are buying, they don't realize it's how young it is. I mean, it's still equivalent of a puppy, and it's a lot harder to slaughter a small young animal than it is, say, like a large cow, which can be kind of, so there's also,
because they're just wiggling around so much.
Wiggling around, they're small, they're like harder to pin. I think in some places they even make them swim through like a chemical concoction to kind of clean them first. But for example, bringing that up at Easter, I just don't think it doesn't connect with I don't know. I just don't think that's really going to work.
Yeah, I hear that. And I will never forget the Thanksgiving when running this animal sanctuary in the early days. My dad came to visit and I served a turkey because it was more important to me to have my dad, who would not come. He said explicitly he would not come if I didn't serve turkey. I served a turkey and I cried. It was oh
my goodness.
I'll never forget it. So do you have Easter dinner with family and friends and sit around while everybody eats these animals that you absolutely adore?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And is that okay?
Well, I just have to put up with it.
Well, because people react differently. I mean, I live in the real world and I'm not particularly physically I'm just, it's so a part of our culture. And I grew up in such a traditional family, and it doesn't bother me to sit around a table so much with people eating animals. But some people have physical reactions. Some people refuse to do it. Where do you fit on
I
that
guess
scale?
I'm like some 50-50. I don't like it. I got to admit, I'm always kind of like half rolling my eyes, but just kind of grinning and bearing it. But I think what I found more effective is just the fact that they know that I'm vegan, and that I will have my vegan food and I will kind of go out of my way to make it look amazing. And they'll go, oh, that's pretty amazing. And I'll actually put out a bit of vegan food for people to try, and, put out some of these new kind of plant-based protein kind of meat alternatives. I'll put some of those out, and, people try and go, oh, that's nice. And I mean, I think that's far more effective to try and get people to kind of slowly change, because, yeah, unfortunately, without some kind of bolt of lightning, they're just not going to change. But I think I have in the wider extended family, when we all get together, a lot of people I think what I'm doing is great, and they do say, oh no, I wouldn't eat lamb again, and so I think it's that approach, I guess, of being a little bit more inclusive, or just trying to advocate without kind of causing arguments, etc. I think longer term, that's the kind of better strategy.
Yeah, you don't want to shut down. And yet I have plenty of friends who believe in that, like, in your face confrontational approach. And honestly, Brendon, this is the most urgent social change movement of all time. And it's probably true that every single approach is needed. Okay, let's go back to St. Bean's Animal Sanctuary. You want to acquire a forever home. You have a very beautiful vision for that forever home that we didn't finish talking about. So tell us what that vision is. And then I want to end with a story of these lambs that will help people who might never have met sheep understand who they are.
Sure. Okay. So my grand vision is really what's holding me back at the moment, which is I really wish I could just do it now, is the ability to get a decent chunk of real estate, and then being able to kind of add all the things that make it visitor friendly that could end up costing huge amount of money. That is really my focus at this point, is being able to pull that off. So I'm everything that I'm earning, I'm just kind of investing and saving and trying to get towards that.
And Brendon, what kind of acreage are you talking about?
It all depends on the property, etc., and how much I can get. But then, like longer term, the bigger stages, I really want to take it to the next level where you've got structures, and you get, as people friendly, we can take people on tours, people can stay, and to whatever property that I end up there with, is kind of turn it into an eco paradise, because I'm not going to have this kind of like farming need of like intensively having every single spot able to graze. Anything that's not going to like good for the animals can get put back into native bush, and make it kind of like an eco paradise.
Nice. So reforesting.
Yeah, reforest as much as possible. Really make it an eco paradise for nature, and then plus have enough land for the animals, and be able to add whatever I needed for people to come and visit.
And have you launched a very specific and aggressive fundraising campaign? How are you doing this? Because people who are listening might be interested in supporting you.
Right now I have stbeans.org, which has a donation system, so anybody can donate at any point in time.
All right.
And there is actually a real estate fund there. You can choose between a general donation or a real estate fund.
stbeans.org. And I'm going to will this into reality for you, Brendon. We've bought a bunch of land, but separately, and then they're now contiguous. So our 150 acres was bought one piece at a time. But the first piece of it, which was the biggest piece, 80 acres, was donated. So it can happen.
Oh, really? Wow.
It can happen.
Okay. That gives me hope.
It can. Yes. Before we sign off, I want a bean story or story about those lambs that will help people understand what they may not understand.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll just speak to the absolute intelligence of beings. So again, what I said earlier, I grew up with German Shepherds. These are very, very intelligent dogs. But I can tell you right now, beans in certain situations will outclass a German Shepherd. And so that's just to speak of like, for example, Beans loves sheep nuts, or I call them pellets, partly because actually when Beans was a lamb, he developed a little bit of bloat. And the vet said, hey, you're going to have to wean him quickly and put him on pellets to get his rumen working correctly. So I did that. So I was a little bit generous with the pellets, so he did end up putting on a bit of weight. But he just absolutely adores the pellets. So, for example, he knows where the pellets are kept. He watches me when I go into the shed, and he's actually figured out the mechanism of the door. You can see dogs jump up and open doors, and they kind of figure it out. But you can see he's actually thought about the mechanism and how it works by watching what I do. So it's a turn. So he goes up there and grabs it with his mouth, and he turns and he tries to do what I do, and he can't quite do it.
Oh,
he keeps trying, but when I think about what he's really figured it out, like the actual mechanism of how.
Yes, if only he had hands.
Exactly. If he had hands, he's just going to open and go straight in.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we humans are probably lucky that animals don't have hands, right?
My goodness. And he works out these, like, when I'm opening the shed, he'll work out the exact moment of weakness. Like, to a perfect moment, he will use his weight to kind of push me out of the way at the exact moment. Like, he knows if he does it too soon, it's not going to work, because I'll be able to shut the door. If I do it too late, I'll be able to kind of hold him back. He's absolutely pinpointed that perfect moment to kind of give a way to get in. And there's so many cases like that when he's motivated, you can just see how intelligent they are. And I think that's the big difference between, say, a dog and sheep. Even the vets are a bit surprised. They don't fully think that they understand their names, but like the Beans Frosty Fanta, for example, the ones that I hand read, they 100% every bit as much as a dog know their names. They're just a little bit less motivated by calling, because like we've bred dogs to be kind of hyper motivated, like, and sheep have never had that kind of breeding, so they're a little bit like, well, what do you want? When I'm calling them, they're like, yeah, but what do you want?
Yeah, I can picture it completely. Brendon, this has been really fun, and I'm sure people are going to want to see these animals and learn about the animals and follow the animals, and hopefully get involved in your campaign to create a wonderful, eco-friendly home for them and those who will follow after them. What are the best social media channels for people to follow you on?
Okay, so at the moment I'm only on Instagram, so it's the handle is at Fanta the Lamb.
At Fanta the Lamb.
Yep.
And your website, again, stbeans.org, did you say?
Yeah, stbeans.org. And on stbeans.org, I've recently completed that, so that has a full, has all the details about what I want to do. It has profiles on the animals, so you can learn all about the individual animals. And there's a donation as well if people would like to donate. And there's also all the contact details if anyone wants to reach out, etc. But yeah, that's the best way.
Beautiful. Thanks for spending time with us, and best of luck to you and to those beautiful animals.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on.
Sure thing. Can't wait to see what the future holds. Have a good feeling. Bye, Brendon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we hope you'll subscribe, share it with friends, and review it wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about the work of Catskill Animal Sanctuary, or to book an in-person visit or a stay at our beautiful bed and breakfast, go to casanctuary.org. Have a beautiful day, and see you next week.